The invisible prison of status. We live in an age where we have more than any of our ancestors could have ever dreamed of. We are healthier, safer, and more connected than ever before. Yet beneath the surface of our modern comfort, there is a quiet, persistent ache, a cold shiver of anxiety that keeps us up at night. It's not the fear of starvation or war, but something far more subtle and perhaps more painful: status anxiety. It is that invisible hunger for the world's attention, the desperate need to be someone, and the terrifying thought that in the eyes of society we might just be no one. Every time we scroll through a feed and see someone's highlight reel, every time we walk into a room and feel the need to justify our job title, we are feeding this monster. We've been told the great modern lie that anyone can be anything, which sounds like a promise of freedom, but has actually become a prison of expectation. In a world where success is supposedly a choice, failure has become a personal shame. We no longer look at the less fortunate with pity, we look at them, and often ourselves, with judgment. Welcome to Read and Rise. Today we are pulling back the curtain on this collective madness with Alain de Botton's masterpiece, Status Anxiety. We are going to explore why we are so obsessed with our social standing, how the meritocracy dream became a psychological nightmare, and most importantly, how we can break free from the court of public opinion to find a sense of worth that isn't tied to a paycheck or a profile picture. Before we dive into the cure for this modern fever, make sure to join our community. If you are someone who values depth over superficiality and wants to rise towards a life of true meaning, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Let's stop caring about where we stand on the social ladder and start rising towards who we truly are. Let's begin. Pillar 1. The roots of the fever. Why we are so anxious. To find the cure, we must first understand the disease. Alain de Botton identifies that our anxiety isn't a personal flaw, it is a byproduct of the very structure of modern society. He breaks this down into 3 devastating shifts in human history. 1. The equality paradox, the agony of choice. For centuries, the social hierarchy was rigid and unchangeable. If you were born a peasant, you accepted your lot in life because there was no alternative. There was no anxiety because there was no possibility of being a king. But the modern world broke those chains and replaced them with the American dream, the idea that everyone is equal and everyone can rise to the top. This sounds like a blessing, but it created a psychological hell. When we are told that anyone can be anything, we no longer compare ourselves to historical figures. We compare ourselves to our peers. We don't envy the billionaires we read about in news. We envy the former classmate who just got a promotion or the neighbor with the new renovation. As de Botton puts it, we only envy those who we feel are like us. In a world where everyone is supposed to be equal, every small difference in success becomes a massive source of resentment and pain. The dark side of meritocracy, from unfortunate to loser. In the pre-modern world, the poor were called the unfortunate, the unlucky ones. Society acknowledged that being poor was often a result of bad luck or divine will. But today, we live in a meritocracy, a system designed to ensure that the best people rise to the top. While this sounds fair, it has a brutal psychological consequence. If we believe that the successful earned their place through talent and hard work, then we must also believe that those at the bottom earned their failure through laziness or stupidity. In a meritocracy, poverty is no longer just a physical condition, it is a moral judgment. We have moved from a society where the poor were seen as humble to a society where they are labeled as losers. This shift has turned our social standing into a direct reflection of our human worth. The fragility of dependence. In the past, a craftsman's status was tied to his skill, which he owned for life. Today, our status is terrifyingly fragile. It depends on the whims of an employer. You can be a success today and unemployed tomorrow because of a corporate restructuring. Your wealth can vanish in a stock market crash. The luck factor. We pretend luck doesn't exist, but a single unexpected event can ruin a reputation. We are anxious because we have built our houses on sand. We are dependent on a global machine that doesn't care about our individual souls. This constant state of uncertainty keeps our status anxiety at a fever pitch, making us feel that we are only as good as our last achievement. Pillar 2. The Remedies. Reclaiming the architecture of self-worth. Alain de Botton argues that while we can never fully escape the desire for status, we can change whose opinion we value and what metrics we use to measure success. He proposes a multi-layered filter comprising philosophy, art, and a confrontation with mortality to help us dissolve the social fever and build a more resilient inner life. 1. The Court of Reason. Philosophy as a filter. The most immediate remedy is to stop treating the world's opinion as an absolute truth. De Botton suggests we treat public opinion like a courtroom. Most of us let every insult, judgment, or social failure hit our hearts directly. Philosophy teaches us to put those judgments through the court of reason first. Instead of asking, "What does the world think of me?" we should ask, "Is this person's judgment actually logical or true?" When we realize that the majority of public opinion is riddled with prejudice, irrationality, and a lack of depth, its power over us begins to fade. As the philosopher Chomfort noted, public opinion is the worst of all opinions. By using reason as a barrier, we move from being victims of social trends to being masters of our own logic. 2. Art, the humanizer of failure. Art, in all its forms, novels, tragedies, and comedy, serves as the great equalizer. The grace of tragedy. Great tragedies, from Sophocles to Shakespeare, show us that even the best people can fail due to bad luck or a single mistake. They teach us empathy instead of judgment. Tragedy reminds us that a person is always infinitely more complex than their job title or their social blunders. The power of comedy. Satire and comedy mock the powerful and show that beneath the expensive suits and titles, they are just as vulnerable and flawed as everyone else. Art pulls back the curtain on status, revealing that success is often a performance and failure is a deeply human experience that deserves dignity rather than shame. 3. Memento Mori. The perspective of the infinite. Perhaps the most powerful remedy de Botton offers is the confrontation with our own mortality. Nothing shrinks status anxiety faster than a graveyard or a vast ancient landscape. From the perspective of 100 years from now, our current social anxieties, our car, our title, our fear of being average, become completely invisible. Death is the ultimate filter that strips away the trivial and leaves only what is essential. By practicing memento mori, remembering that we must die, we realize that time is too precious to spend living by someone else's definition of success. Pillar 3. The Meritocracy Trap, the Moralization of Failure. In the pre-modern world, society was built on a foundation of inherited status. If you were a peasant, you were born into that role by the grace of God or the lottery of birth. While this was inherently unfair, it offered a strange psychological comfort. It wasn't your fault. You were called unfortunate, literally someone whom fortune had not favored. Alain de Botton argues that the shift toward meritocracy, the idea that the most talented and hard-working should rise to the top, has turned our bank accounts into a direct measurement of our human souls. 1. From unfortunate to loser. The great moral shift of the modern era is the move from fortune to merit. In a meritocratic world, success is no longer a gift, it is an achievement. But the logical flip side is devastating. If the successful deserve their success because they are smart and hard-working, then the unsuccessful must deserve their failure because they are lazy or incompetent. This has transformed poverty from a physical struggle into a spiritual shame. In the past, the poor were seen as unfortunate. Today, they are labeled as losers. This shift makes failure hurt far more than it did for our ancestors because it implies a lack of character, not just a lack of cash. 2. The narrative of anyone can be anything. The modern world constantly reinforces the idea that the ceiling is infinite. This narrative is meant to be inspiring, but for most, it is a source of constant pressure. If the barriers are supposedly gone, then why haven't you reached the top? The meritocracy trap creates a world where we feel we must constantly become something better to prove our worth. We stop seeing our lives as a journey of being and start seeing them as a performance where the audience, society, is constantly judging our rank. This leads to the imposter syndrome, where even those at the top live in fear of being exposed as someone who doesn't actually merit their position. 3. The erasure of luck. To maintain the illusion of meritocracy, society has to downplay the role of luck. We pretend that every variable is within our control: our health, our market stability, the timing of our birth, and the connections we make. By erasing luck from our success stories, we've made our failures feel absolute. De Botton suggests that one of the first steps to healing from status anxiety is to reintroduce the concept of luck back into our lives. Acknowledging that the race is not always to the swift allows us to stop taking our failures so personally and our successes so arrogantly. Pillar 4. Art and Tragedy, the Great Equalizers. In a world governed by meritocracy, we're taught to look at failure with judgment and success with envy. Alain de Botton argues that art is the primary tool we have to dismantle this cruel hierarchy. Art doesn't just entertain, it functions as a psychological filter that humanizes the loser and humbles the winner. The grace of tragedy, moving from judgment to empathy. In everyday life, when someone loses their job, goes bankrupt, or experiences a public scandal, we tend to label them as a failure. We assume they made a series of bad choices because they weren't smart or capable enough. Tragedy, from the plays of Sophocles to modern cinematic dramas, tells us a different story. It takes a failure and shows us the excruciatingly human details behind their downfall. The role of hamartia. Tragedy teaches us that even the most virtuous people can be destroyed by a single mistake or a stroke of bad luck. The emotional shift. When we watch a tragedy, we don't feel superior to the fallen hero, we feel pity and fear. We realize that there but for the grace of God go I. By shifting our perspective from judgment to empathy, tragedy allows us to see that a person's soul is always infinitely more valuable and complex than their social or financial standing. Comedy and satire, stripping away the mask of power. If tragedy helps us sympathize with the lowly, comedy and satire help us stop being intimidated by the mighty. Status anxiety is often fueled by the belief that those at the top are superior, more refined, or fundamentally different from us. Satirists and comedians pull back the curtain on the elite, showing us that beneath the expensive suits, titles, and palaces, they are just as vulnerable, clumsy, and riddled with insecurities as everyone else. By making us laugh at the powerful, comedy removes the sacred aura of status. It reminds us that social rank is a performance, a costume that anyone can wear, and that at the end of the day, we are all just mammals trying to make sense of a confusing world. Art as a moral compass. Ultimately, de Botton suggests that the purpose of great art is to challenge society's narrow definition of what makes a life significant. Art celebrates the quiet virtues, kindness, observation, loyalty, and resilience that rarely make it onto a resume or a rich list. By focusing on the beauty of a simple meal, a sincere conversation, or a small act of bravery, art creates a counterculture of value. It gives us permission to respect ourselves for our character rather than our bank accounts, providing a sanctuary where we can rise above the noise of the status race. Pillar 5. The infinite perspective, death and nature. In our daily lives, we are trapped in a micro perspective. We obsess over an email that wasn't answered, a promotion we didn't get, or a subtle social slight at a party. These things feel massive because they occupy our entire field of vision. De Botton argues that the ultimate cure for this nearsightedness is a confrontation with the infinite. 1. The leveling effect of death. Memento mori. Most of us avoid the thought of death because it feels morbid, but de Botton suggests it is actually a tool for profound clarity. When we look at our lives from the perspective of our final hour, the hierarchy of what matters changes instantly. The trivial versus the essential. From a deathbed, no one wishes they had a more impressive job title or a more expensive car. Instead, we value relationships, peace of mind, and authenticity. The shared fate. Death reminds us that every person we envy, every billionaire, celebrity, and successful peer shares the same biological expiration date. In the face of eternity, the gap between the high-status person and the low-status person shrinks to nothing. 2. The consolation of vast landscapes. If death is the temporal infinite, nature is the spatial infinite. De Botton notes that standing before a vast mountain range, a desert, or the ocean has a specific psychological effect. It makes our status anxiety feel ridiculous. Proportion. In the city, we feel like the center of the universe. In the wilderness, we realize we are small, fleeting specks in a 4-billion-year story. Transcending the ego. Nature doesn't care about your resume, a mountain doesn't respect your social standing, and the stars don't keep track of your likes. Being in the presence of something vast and indifferent allows us to shed the heavy burden of our ego and find peace in our smallness. 3. Ruins and the passage of time. De Botton also points to the beauty of ruins, the remains of great empires and palaces. Looking at a fallen Roman column reminds us that even the highest status is temporary. Every important person today will eventually become a name in a book and then, eventually, be forgotten entirely. This isn't a depressing thought, it's a liberating one. It gives us permission to stop taking ourselves so seriously and to live for the present moment rather than for the monuments of status. Pillar 6. The Bohemian Alternative, Redefining the Tribe. In the previous pillars, we explored internal shifts, using philosophy, art, and the perspective of death to soothe our individual anxiety. However, Alain de Botton recognizes that we are social creatures. It is incredibly difficult to ignore status when everyone around you is obsessed with it. Pillar 6 introduces the Bohemian as the ultimate social counterweight. 1. Challenging the hierarchy of values. The Bohemian is not just an artist or a wanderer, it is anyone who deliberately chooses to ignore the official social hierarchy. While the mainstream world ranks people based on their income, job titles, and material possessions, the Bohemian ranks people based on creativity and originality. What have you made? Emotional intelligence, how deep is your understanding of the human soul? And authenticity. Are you living according to your own truth? By shifting the criteria for status, the Bohemian makes it possible to be poor in money but high status in character and intellect. 2. The power of the subculture. De Botton argues that the best way to survive status anxiety is to change your audience. If you spend your time with people who only talk about real estate and luxury brands, you will naturally feel like a failure if you don't have those things. The Bohemian alternative is about finding a community, whether it's a group of writers, activists, outdoor enthusiasts, or creators that celebrates different virtues. When you find a tribe that values your contributions to their specific field or your character as a friend, the judgment of the outside world loses its sting. You realize that you don't need the world's approval, you only need the approval of the people you actually respect. 3. Living for the soul over the system. Ultimately, the Bohemian path is a refusal to let the economic system dictate your human worth. It is the realization that the status race is a game designed by society to keep people productive but not necessarily happy. By choosing to prioritize experiences, relationships, and intellectual growth over the traditional markers of success, you move from being a player in someone else's game to being the architect of your own. As de Botton concludes, the only way to truly win the status game is to realize you don't have to play it at all. Conclusion: the quiet freedom of self-definition. Alain de Botton's status anxiety is more than just a diagnosis of a modern sickness. It is a manifesto for psychological independence. We have seen how our obsession with status is built on the fragile sands of public opinion, economic volatility, and the cruel illusion that our worth is defined by our rank. But through philosophy, art, and the grounding perspective of our own mortality, we find that the status trap is one we can choose to walk out of at any time. The ultimate takeaway from this journey is that while we cannot control the world's tendency to judge, we have absolute authority over the metrics by which we judge ourselves. You are not a success because of a title, and you are not a failure because of a setback. You are a complex, resilient, and inherently valuable human being whose significance is found in your character, your creativity, and the authenticity of your life. As we wrap up this summary, remember that the only way to truly win the status race is to realize that the finish line is a mirage. Stop climbing the ladders leaning against other people's walls. Rise towards your own values, define your own success, and find peace in being exactly who you are.